for me, it's a sense of freedom, actually, freedom from being embedded versus the freedom of being alone. And I think the freedom from alone is an illusion. And we fool ourselves with that illusion every day in these wealthy countries.
And welcome to another episode on Design to Connect. How are you, Khadija?
Really good. Finally, the sun is bright. So
yes. We won't have it for long.
Yeah, still today is bright.
Yes, it's true. We have a very nice sky that we normally never have in Milan. But yeah, if you're new to Design to Connect, here we talk about architecture and cities and urban design and how we can design our cities in the future in a way that we would feel better in them, we would feel healthier in them, and also our environment could feel healthier and better. So yeah, what do we have here with us?
So excited to introduce. Today with us we have Seth Kaplan, and he's a leading expert, as you were saying, on fragile states and a lecturer at the Johns Hopkins University. Senior advisor for the Institute for Integrated Transition and consultant to multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, USA State Department, USA Agency for International Development, and OECD. Welcome and hello, Seth. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you both. I'm so thrilled to be with you. Thank you so much.
So before, delving into your immense and wonderful career, we would like to maybe delve into more your personal sphere, if we might, of course. So can you tell us about your favorite memory when it comes to community or neighborhood?
Favorite is hard because it's hard to choose, but why don't I give you a very good recent memory? So today is Friday, so I'll give you this past Sunday, so 5 days ago. This is a first for me. I lived in my neighborhood for 12 years. I love the neighborhood. I literally, when we were moving, I lived in New York City. I wanted to get out. I wanted a more intimate sense of togetherness place. And literally, I looked 5 or 6 different neighborhoods. I literally compared places. I went to these places. I slept in these places, and I was really systematic about it. And I had some idea. I did think I would move all the way to Washington, D.C., but I was moving towards Washington. And then someone we knew back in New York City in Brooklyn said, consider this neighborhood. They knew somebody. We came once, we came twice, and eventually we moved to this neighborhood. So I'm so thrilled. I've been here all these years, and yet I think probably the most incredible experience I had in the 12 years was just 5 days ago. And what happened 5 days ago? I had a neighbor who organized a concert in their backyard, basically combined 3 backyards, had, I think, maybe 300 people, had a couple of people, had actually, I think, 3 sets of singers, but the main singer was quite well known, at least in my circles, and had some connection. All these people had connection to the neighborhood or the community or people in the community. So you weren't like asking strangers. So this person, I think, had gone to high school or something in this area. And it was incredible. It was just like to go into a backyard, have hundreds of people, have food, and to talk. And so the thing about where I live, I mean, I focus on neighborhoods because intellectually, when I was asked about America and I thought about our fragility, we'll talk about it. I thought professionally, this is where I should focus on. But personally, I also have made that choice many times. And here was this great example. I can still hear the music. I can still see all the people. I can imagine all the kids running back and forth, the energy, so much social vitality. And it just happened a few blocks from where I live, and it was unreal. It was like an experience you would never expect to happen. And that to me was a great memory. So I knew at the time, this is going to be a great memory. And I'm literally going around taking photographs from every angle because I want to remember this. Sometimes great memories are unexpected. There I was in the moment and I knew it would be a great memory.
Oh,
That's
thank you. Amazing. And yeah. And I also loved how you basically dated the neighborhood before being there. Like you were going and sleeping in the neighborhood to see how it felt.
Yes.
That's pretty systematic.
Whenever you do something, we don't want to just let our abstract, our intellectual, you need to get your heart involved. So this is my way of actually the first-hand experience is the only way you really understand things.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were saying, you were talking about a sense of togetherness, but I also feel, at least me, when I go to a city or to a new place, there is also some feeling, a connection that you can feel or not feel in a place that you cannot really explain. And
there's a source of energy.
Yeah, there is an energy.
Yes, energy. It's energy. I mean, what I find interesting is both of you come from countries, if I may say that are known for their social warmth, their relational warmth. And I think in the West, and I'm assuming many of your listeners or viewers are in the Western countries, the richer developed countries. I mean, Italy's a little bit different, and you're both in Italy. Yeah. It's one place where I find a bit of social warmth, a lot of social warmth, but mostly in America or Northern Europe, people are more distant. They tend to be more alone. They don't obviously create social warmth. And I've always felt this great attraction to places that were very warm. And so I wanted to live in a place that was warm. And a lot of my work has certainly been, there's an intellectual reason why I do it, but it's this feeling that I like time with people that are very warm.
Yeah, it's a longing, no? That we all look for.
I don't have it. When I don't have it, it's like I need it.
Yeah.
Even if I'm in my cave thinking, working every day, when I walk on the streets, I feel, absolutely. Even if I just say hi to somebody, I just walk down the street, I know the people. I feel like I belong here. It's a sense of belonging, a sense of this is my place that you're not going to get if you're completely isolated and you have no connection to people.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you were saying that Italy is a little bit better, but like Milan has talking about it, the energy level, it has a different energy, like because Milan is trying to be more, let's say, Western, or they call it here more European. And like the moment when I travel to the cities, like around, I completely feel different. And the moment that I reach Milan, I become tired. Like it's very, very strange.
Really? They actually want to be more efficient and therefore less relational. Yes, efficiency is great because it's good that we have material wealth, but it's also can be the enemy of relationships.
Yeah. And it impacts everything. So as you were saying, having this amazing feeling that you have in your neighborhood is not something that we can find a lot, especially in the Western world. And we are seeing that these social bonds they are kind of disintegrating more and more. So we wanted to ask you, what do you think are the causes of those? Why are we seeing this here? And do you feel this was something that comes from like the history? Have Westerns always been like this? Because I don't think so. So what made this really, like a big difference between the two worlds, and what are the causes that are bringing us here?
Well, first, that's a great question. It's a very hard question to answer. It's also a hard question to prove that my answer is correct because we can't. So I'll tell you my opinion. So first of all, when you say West, it's very diverse. Southern Europe is very different than Northern Europe, and I could actually find you data that Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, those places, the Mediterranean, they are more relational. I mean, there's a good and bad. I think in terms of adapting to some of the challenges of the modern world, you could argue the Southern European countries, they don't adapt in some ways as well. Think of Italy and the role of women. You could have a whole discussion about Italy and the role of women. On the other hand, these countries tend to be more family, more relational, more community-oriented, so they're less likely to have loneliness. So there's certainly a cultural element. The more you go south to north, and I think the Anglosphere, the English-speaking countries in Northern Europe are worse. But I would say, broadly speaking, the changes that we have seen in 60 years. In the United States, the peak of social connectivity is 1964. There's lots of data, 1964, and then it's all downhill. I would say you have cars. Certainly have cars. You have development patterns, people going from living relatively dense to living spread out in suburbs. So this is, thinking about design, went from multifunctional to single functional zoning. You went from walking to driving. I think all of that changed a lot. I think on the other hand, you have the careers change. There's people are out of the house more. Instead of one person working, you have two people working. You have smaller families. You have less people at home for less time. So all of that, I think, also matters. I think you also have, those are all different categories. I think you could also talk about the types of things in terms of how we're being trained. You talked a little bit before about how Milano wants to think it's more European. Well, the question is, why do we think being smarter or being more developed means we're more isolated? So I think there's something with education. Education and these generations have taught us to leave behind wherever we came from, to become very placeless, to become very rational, to become like very sort of anti-relationships, relational. And I think there's a component about how we're being, so something not only in the culture, but something in how we are being trained to think, and the types of things that are expected of us if we are having certain careers and certain trajectories in our life. And those are things that could be changed. The physical landscape could be changed. I think there's many things that could be changed. But I would say, and now, of course, more recently, we have phones and things are, so the phones, I think people like to blame the phones, but I think you have to look at a whole series of technological shifts, and the phones are the last part. And so you have technological, you have societal, you probably have some intellectual changes. I think they're all parts of a larger puzzle that have made us more likely to think that it's better to be alone, and actually we have to be intentional personally and as a society to build up our relationships. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you. And as you were saying, about the educational level, like that we are taught to be alone, it's like my brain connected it, that it can be so much connected to the gender equality, because again, that idea of the lone wolf, if we are more isolated, if we are alone, if we are the only winner in the society, if we are more individualistic, all of this also comes from like putting the masculine energy, I don't want to say like man above woman, but the masculine energy above the feminine energy. And I think like maybe we don't think about it much, but gender equality can also bring a lot more the ideas of communities, and maybe creating cities that, they put community as the main source and also bring people together. The relationships become more important than being the one who wins it all and is on the top of everyone and it's alone and all of those things. So I think as an educational level, both the idea of race and gender become also really important, because they are all, at the end of the day, interconnected.
I mean, what I think the point you make is interesting, this masculine versus feminine energy. I haven't heard those terms quite used that way, but I would say this is not a male female thing, but if you think about men and women, and you could find studies of this, women are more relational and men are more like whatever goal oriented. And hopefully no one will attack me for differentiating between whatever, but I think there's clear differences. And I would say to the extent that we've made our whole society about work and about getting ahead, you could say that's the masculine energy has consumed society, if you're thinking of it that way. I mean, I don't think of men as being exclusively like that, because men and women are on the spectrum and they overlap, but they're distinct even if they have a lot of overlap. So I would say to the extent that we had made work the primary focus of everything, that basically means that we have discounted the importance of relationships and how we've designed literally the physical landscape as well as the professional landscape, as well as the intellectual landscape. I mean, what is economics today except if you contribute in one way, we don't count it. If you contribute it through a job, it's counted. So volunteer is a minus almost, and getting a paid job is a plus. So I think I'm not masculine, feminine is the exactly right way to frame that, but it is certainly valuing of certain elements in our society at the price of undervaluing the others. I think that's a real loss to our society.
Yeah. And I feel, as you were touching on it, is also about trying to make everything rational, while as we are saying, we are talking about, sense of things, of feelings. And those are things that when you put in a relationship, it's not something rational. So it's always like we are kind of trained to, your feelings are your feelings, and then your job is your job. When you are at school, you're just at school. So everything else is just coming as what you do after school, after work, after university. And this is something that also deteriorates so much how you can, how you feel. Yeah. How you feel with yourself even, or feeling something with the others. Yep. And it's so key for any relationship.
Definitely. And because you cannot have coherence also. Sorry. Is that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I buy it. I mean, I think it's we don't talk in our private, professional, our life about our conversations about our life. Everything starts with what are you doing professionally? And so, what's your job? It's almost like your identity is your job. Your identity used to be your community. If I went to Senegal or Iran or most of the world, your identity is your community. In the more developed world, your identity is very much your job. And so if you change locations, you throw everybody in your life away. Well, I haven't lost my identity, but in essence you have, but not to other people on some level. It's kind of awful if you think about it that way.
Yeah,
It is.
but we can change it.
Can we?
Slowly but surely. I think I had a curiosity. So you work on fragile states. And of course, the words we use matters, as, the feelings we have. So I was wondering, when we say fragile, we say repairing, how it comes that, you choose those words.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't choose the words originally, and I'm a big believer that we want to build from strengths, don't focus on weaknesses. So when I go to when somebody asks me, can you help think strategically about it? And I literally have a phone call this afternoon to talk to someone about Memphis. They work on a specific, Memphis is a city in the middle of the United States on the Mississippi River. The United States, just compared to Europe, such a huge country. I can fly hours and I haven't left the country. So it's always shocking when I compare the two places. But so I know they're working on a neighborhood, it's a community foundation. They have a lot of questions. And the thing is, I don't want to focus on fragile. It's a term that people use, and there's some meaning behind it that's helpful to understand the problem that they have and how to help the country. But really what you would much rather do is, what are the strengths of this country? So if I work on a place, for example, it's a bit of a tangent for our audience. I spent a good chunk of my professional life working in Nigeria. Actually, it's one of my jobs. I work on Nigeria. I work on a part of Nigeria with rising violence, the middle part of the country where the north and south, most ethnically, religiously diverse. And so we have a strategy for this place. And a big part of the strategy is to build on what works, build on traditional institutions, build on parts of the government that are more effective to work, build on the legitimacy of leaders. And so the point is, they have some clear problems. Our job is to make the system better, the system of managing differences, managing conflict, settling disagreements better, because if you do that, you won't get to violence. If you don't do that, you get to violence, and the violence gets ever worse. And to make the system better, we're very specific on what are things that actually are working, and how do we strengthen them, or how do we thread them together better? Again, it's very much thinking about the system. So I don't think fragile states is the best term, but I don't know a better term, because clearly there's like a third of the world's countries that we work on in this field.
Yeah.
I mean, the other term that people use is conflict affected. So would you rather be called fragile or conflict affected? They're not great terms.
Yeah.
Sorry about it.
And like, I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe again, yeah, it's not the best thing to say. But I think when we just right now we talk about fragile states, the first thing that I think comes to mind of all of us is I put them in quote unquote like developing countries. So how can we make all of us understand that this fragility also like exists everywhere? And how does it differ? Like, how does fragility maybe look in maybe African countries, whereas in Asian countries, in the Middle East, or in America, or in Europe? So if you can tell us about that.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So fragility means different things for different people. And this, I'll explain how my work connects. So for many people, a country that's has conflict, it's fragile. It has dysfunctional government, it's fragile. They just look at the problems and they define it as fragile. I don't take that approach. For me, the single most important element in a country that's fragile is weak social cohesion, and or weak institutions. So if you're cohesive, you can generally come together to manage your challenges. If you have strong institutions that can manage differences, again, the institutions will get people to manage their differences and come together. If you have neither, you're fragile. So if you think about, it's a very relational approach. For me, it's all about the relationships between groups and our ability to manage the differences between groups. So if I'm in a good example would be, I work in Nigeria. So Nigeria is very ethnically and religiously divided, and most, not all, but almost a significant amount of the conflict, some of the conflict is simply people trying to steal, you understand, and they're using the lawlessness. But a lot of the conflict is over resources. Who gets this land? Who gets this mine? Who gets access to this land, or whatever, these specific water resources or something like that. And it's usually ethnic or religious component is in there. It happens at a very micro level. They've had a civil war with millions died, which was a much bigger conflict. But today, a lot of the conflict is just every place is having conflict, and how well are they managing it or not. So that's, and then when I go and people ask me what's wrong with America or what's wrong with developed countries, when people ask me that, and I had just come back from some fragile state, from Sri Lanka, or wherever it was, Somalia, it would be, I would say there's no comparison. Italy or the United States or whatever it might be, you don't have the same problems. So what are the problems? So I had to go and do what I always do. I had to go and read a lot, interview a lot of people, wander about. We spoke a little bit before we started the importance of physically experiencing the place, or maybe that was already in the conversation. It's very important that we physically experience space. So I literally went around. And for me, the big question is, our countries, the developed countries, are having problems. They have a variety of problems, but there's a set of problems that did not exist 2 generations ago. And all of those could be tracked down to a decline in relationships. So for me, when I talk about a fragile neighborhood or the growing fragility of society, it's basically a decline in social cohesion. It could be a decline in social bonds, social capital, social support systems. Those are all within society. It's all about the social fabric. So the weaker the social fabric, the more alienated people become, the more lonely people become, the more likely they're going to get into trouble in some places with drugs. We have a lot of people with drug overdoses. Or we have more likely to have suicides. And this is not new. Sociologists have been talking about this problem, about how society that brings you together, a society that alienates you, for over 100 years. But we haven't really connected it to the discourse. You just have to look and find it in the science, actually.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense. I got
Absolutely.
a thoughtful expression there.
No, I was putting it all together. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I feel, as you were saying, like, because sometimes, professionals know things, but of course it's something else, put it into practice. Something, because probably since you were talking about when the cars came, how, how people started to live differently. And then we have also, of course, all the buildings that change. I mean, so many things that influence the way we behave.
So many things change.
So
yes,
many
the
things
physical
change.
landscape.
Yeah, and that is so important. And, sometimes I feel we know things. We say to people, you should have a relation with your neighbor. You should, go out in nature. But then what I want to ask is, we know what's a good and not fragile. How is the opposite of not fragile? Healthy? Healthy neighborhood should be. But how do you go for building it? Like, what are the elements you need to build so then those relationships are just coming spontaneous, as you were saying?
So I think we actually use the term healthy and unhealthy neighborhoods. That's a term that we use. And if I do field building, so we can use that term. You could use other terms. I could also use fragile to flourishing. So I think you have two questions there. First, what is a healthy neighborhood? A healthy neighborhood for me is a sense of place, a sense of common identity, a sense that we have some common allegiance or common destiny, and so that is very much about high connectivity, and that's very much about lots and lots of local institutions and activities. I use the expression overlapping institutions. So it's not these big organizations. It's very place specific. Could be the local coffee shop, could be the local activity in the neighborhood. I mentioned the concert, the local gathering, could be the local park. It could be, again, I think you need activities, but institutions are really important. So I can measure a strength of a neighborhood partly by how many different religious, civic, economic, social, and so on institutions. So, and then if I was to think about that from a design perspective, so if I'm thinking about the physical design of a neighborhood, one is it helps if there's a clear begin and end to the neighborhood. It doesn't mean you're disconnected from anywhere else. You don't want to do that, because a fragile neighborhood could be a neighborhood that's systematically disconnected, like some segregated American neighborhoods. They're systematically disconnected. But the idea that we have a clear sense of who we are, and then within that, a center, I would say the best neighborhoods, they have their own center, which could be shops, could be gathering places. So my neighborhood, it's not quite designed this way. We have, on one side, we are sort of a bounded neighborhood. We do have, I would say, a pretty ugly, but it is pretty much ours, shopping district. So there's 3 restaurants. I know the owner of the 3 restaurants. 2 of them live in our neighborhood. 1 of them lives not far away. There's a place to shop. There's a couple other things there. There's now a new barber. So everyone's very excited because we got a new barber. People want to go, and I'm thinking, I need to cut my hair. Am I going to try it? I'm not sure yet, because I'm going to cut my hair on Sunday, but maybe I'm going to try that barber. Maybe I'm going to wait a little bit. But anyway, the point is there's places to gather. There's the physical element. I would say lots of local organizations really help. So the extent that you can design, I think neighborhood schools are very important. To the extent that you can have something like a mini library could be very important. Coffee shops are really important. So, and then in terms of housing, I would say, at least from my experience, a diversity of housing, mixed income housing is really important. The United States, Europe is a little different, but the United States has a lot of class-based neighborhoods, wealthy here, poor here, and it's been getting worse and worse. So very important we have mixed income neighborhoods and a great diversity of housing options so that people at different parts of your life, you can be young and live there, you can be old and you live there, you can be early in your career and then you can need a bigger house later in your career and you could still be in the neighborhood. Imagine that. So in my neighborhood, just so happens on one side of the neighborhood, we have, I think it's four apartment buildings, a couple of them 20, 25, I've never been at the top, but 20 something stories. And so you can get a 1-bedroom, you can get a studio apartment, and you can get houses. And if you go across my neighborhood, you get like, I would say, relatively cheap small houses up to people literally who are spending like, they're literally building these mansions, and they're all within, and all of that, they're not in the same part of the neighborhood quite, but they are within 20 minutes walking, and it's considered one neighborhood. So I would say all of this is really important because we have a great diversity of people in the neighborhood, and yet we have a sense of togetherness, and I think that's hugely important.
Yeah. And okay, I have two questions that maybe they're related, maybe they're not unrelated. The first one is like, and we completely agree with you that all of these elements should exist. And as Khadija was saying, that academically, like this information are out there, that this is good, but how do you start in a landscape that the voices that are driving the other definition of development, they are very loud. And I can see this in, for example, Europe, as we were talking about, more walkability, the number of, for example, SUVs are increasing in Europe. And when we talk about sustainability, and always the environmental part of sustainability is the most important. So the answer to the pollution, the car traffic, all of that is the electric cars, which, as we know, they are not the answer, but they are the louder voice. And for most of the people living in a city, that's the solution to what we are facing. So how, like in the landscape that is, this much as a power dynamic, there is this much difference. How do we start?
Okay, and you're thinking of it from a developer perspective, from a design perspective, from a neighbor's. Again, what perspective would you? And tell me who am I speaking in the voice of?
Okay, maybe a designer / citizen that is interested.
Got it. Okay,
making
so
a change.
I think there's different things. So if you're a citizen, if you're a citizen, I generally think there's different levels of things you can do. Very simple thing for yourself. Again, the whole key here is intentional. We have to be intentional about building relationships in a way that we did not have to we didn't have to do it before, because before it happened organically. Now we have to literally jumpstart like a muscle, or jumpstart an engine that's not working anymore. So as an individual, there's many levels. The first thing is you can simply get out there and knock on the doors of your neighbors. I mean, I've heard of something called the 8-door challenge. Can you go and knock on the 8 nearby? I don't know. I'm trying to think about physically what that means, but maybe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2 and 2, and maybe those are the 8 neighbors. Can you actually get to know those people? Could that be your initial? That would be a simple thing. A second level will be can you find 2 or 3 allies in your neighborhood and do something together? I have a person who I spoke to recently, and her passion is block parties. So she started some organization, national organization on block parties, and she promotes block parties. I have someone else who contacted me recently. They're working on the National Neighbors Day. So the point is, you don't have to do those big things, but you could start individual houses. You could start with a block party. You could start to find a couple of allies, and you could try to do something together. You could also look for institutions. Again, I don't mean big, huge things. Local institutions. It could be a local store, a local charity, a local nonprofit, a local civic association. If you're religious, it could be a local mosque or church or temple or whatever it might be. The thing is, you find an institution to be an ally. That would be the next level up. I'm thinking the levels up. Institutions are really important because if they're local, they're committed to the place. They have some resources. They have some capacity. They're going to be there for a while, and they want the place to thrive. I mean, not everyone may think about it, but a local small business has a lot of interest in that place doing well. And so especially if it's retail, clothing, or whatever it might be, I mean, food is the best because food brings people together. But the extent that you can, so that would be an individual. If you're a designer, of course, it's more challenging. But I would think about, again, assuming you have projects, how do you take a neighborhood perspective in any project that you do? So certainly one thing you could do is, even if I build a single building, what would it mean to think of that building as part of the neighborhood? How would I think differently about that? Is there something I would do on the street? It was something I would do with the front facing. It's something I would do with the relationship with other buildings. Is there something that I might do in the consultation process that would bring people together? I think you could think about every step of what you do. But again, you could also think of it, if you're in the field doing work, maybe you focus on parks, maybe you focus more on public spaces, maybe you focus more on not standalone buildings, but something that allows a greater communication between different parts of a neighborhood. I think you could think about all these things in terms of the choices you make in your career, and of course, how you promote things. I believe if you're thinking about how to change the dynamics, there is growing demand for customers to live in highly socially connected spaces. And so that would be my selling point. If you're trying to sell yourself or sell a project, this project, a lot of people think just money today, money, that's all they're thinking about. But if you're to sell, there's going to be a growing demand, a growing market for people. I know a few developers, that's all they do is they build bigger developments, but their only point is, we're going to build social connectivity in because we have seen over and over again, it gets a higher price point and they can make more money for the higher price point. And so I would say, can you build a project or a series of projects and eventually a portfolio that's highlighting these promote social connectivity? They got a higher price point. They were at a longer presence in the market. That's what I would be doing. And just showcasing and promoting what you're doing.
Love it. I'm going to make a toolkit out of what I said. We are going to post it. That's cool. Okay.
I think you could do that. You could also do metrics. These are things you measure before. These are things you measure afterwards. Sense of belonging, sense of connection, pride of place, whatever. You come up with a whole bunch of things and show how that was increased or got good results from your work. I bet that would show people, yes, I'm sure you can. I don't think it's simple, but I think it's very possible.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel sometimes, I mean, I'm always going back to that, but also, once you read it, once you know what it is about, it's also about, trying it. I mean, a dinner, a social supper, whatever. Even as you were saying, the physical experience is so much important. I mean, I knew about some developer, they just developed somewhere something and they've never been into the neighborhood, which is like, how can you be sure that what you're putting there, it's working if you're not going there? So, well, sometimes we need also to remind ourselves that you first need to experience the place before even starting to draw something.
Yes, I would never do a project without walking around, talking to people, Again, it's hard for me to think. One great thing about my neighborhood is most people, they live in their house and they're on an island. And for me, literally the neighborhood is an extension of my home. And again, the thing is, I'm not sure it would be obvious from a design perspective. It just so happens it's as an experience, I feel that. But if you were thinking from a design perspective, how do I make people feel that they're part of the neighborhood? And what do I do? But you have to, of course, you're designing for the neighborhood as well as for that standalone unit. So what does that mean? The physical for me is so important.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I feel something they have a lot in the Netherlands, not really in Italy, is, before your house door, there is like a small space that is maybe a staircase that goes up to your door, or a small garden. And I feel that's a really good place where people, if they want just to stay there, read a book, and it's a filter to your house, but it's also space that, brings you to the neighborhood. And I feel more and more it's something that could help building this connection, because it's, you feel safe because your house is there. But on the same time, if you want to connect, you can be there. And I just realized, I think that I need to go in the other city and see if it's something that exists.
Yeah.
Because now I feel, you just go inside a building and you are there. But if you had this more shelter in between spaces, maybe, because sometimes large spaces are scary for some people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, here public and private, it's like very close. Like there is no space in between that you can experience both public and private and be a part of neighborhood.
Yeah, or sometimes they are in the backyard. They're not in front on the street.
Yeah, that is used mostly for trash cans. Yeah, here. That's it.
Yeah, same.
Not for social connections. Do you want to ask the one about the loneliness, or should?
Yeah, go for it.
No, go. Let's go.
Yeah. We touched a bit on it when we were talking about healthy and unhealthy. And of course, I feel in your experience, you are more in countries where, we're talking about conflict. And actually, when you were talking about it, I was also thinking about my experience in Northern Ireland, which is in Europe. Sometimes we don't believe that things are still happening. There can be conflict.
It's fragile.
In Europe.
It's only fragile. It's only a fragile place.
Yeah,
that is for sure.
Yeah. Although it's a fragile place, but I've never felt connected to a place as I was in Belfast.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know what it is, and I feel it's the connection, because if I compare it to where I am in Italy, it's much easier there that someone asks you if you need direction, if you're lost, or just say hello on the street, which is the basic of relationship. Anyhow, so another sensitive topic, it's the suicide rate we see. I feel it's a topic, of course, at least in Italy, we don't really talk about it compared maybe to other places. And sometimes it's really a matter of being isolated, being in a, fragile position and not being able to seek for help. So relationship and being connected to the place you are is so important when you need to seek for help. So again, I don't know if there is another way to go for it when we talk, especially about being healthy, when someone really needs, help. So I don't know, a bit confused. It's not even a question, but
like if neighborhood level connections could help with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't I give I'll give a couple of examples. So what I love about my neighborhood, besides the feeling and the I have some friends, but I have hundreds of relationships. Literally hundreds of people. I could go down the street and tell you who's in which house and something about them. And every time I see someone on the street I don't know, immediately asking who are these people? Why? Not because I'm unhappy they're here, but we're curious who they are. And I'll tell you what that means when people know each other. So I live on a 2-block street, and about a block down at a house, I think it's 903, I have this incredible neighbor who's quiet woman in her 50s, doesn't talk so much. I see her all the time taking walks, and she has 3 grown-up kids. In fact, one of her kids has an engagement party. I think it's in about another 2 weeks, and they're all like in their 20s or something. And I don't see her. I don't know. I don't talk to her very much. She's quiet, and yet I see over and over again how many things she does for the neighborhood. The first thing is, I know she visits people who live alone, knocks on their doors, knocks and say hi, and goes visits them, probably spends 25, 30 minutes with them. And I know she does that because my immediate neighbor on one side is an elderly woman who lives alone. And I know this woman comes in every week, knocks on the door, says hi, and I see her walking up and down the street. So I'm sure she does that to several people. I also know that when there's a park cleanup, who's the one who's organizing it? It happens to be her. When there's some like gathering, like used clothes for a charity or asking to volunteer for some other charity, whose email is on the list, it's her name. So she's doing all these little things. Nobody's asked her. No one has given her an award for this because the neighbor doesn't have we don't have a neighborhood award that I'm aware of. Some organizations that give out awards if you did a lot for that organization, but there's no award for the neighborhood. So she does all that. So that to me is a great example. I'll give you another example. I remember I was speaking less than a year ago, last October, and I was like all the way across the country in Denver, which is as far from Milano as, I don't know, further than London from where you are. It's almost like it's like 4 or 5 hours flight. And I was speaking 2 time zones away, and I'd finished my talk, and I'm hanging around listening to other people talk, and I'm watching my phone. And my neighborhood has lots of WhatsApp groups, like too many actually. I'm mostly not paying attention. Some of them are very quiet. They never say anything. And one of these pretty quiet ones, all of a sudden it came out that somebody said, I have a child that's missing. I need help. And boom, all of a sudden this quiet chat became a noisy chat, and everyone's da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they say, let's start another chat to look for the kid and any volunteers. So they say, we're gonna meet, we're gonna start at 4 p.m., whatever the time was. Anyone who wants to help, go to that chat. And I believe 20 people out of no place jump to that chat, and they all say, what direction am I going to go in? And they divide up, and my neighborhood happens to be surrounded by woods. Like 3 of the sides, there's woods. There's a bunch of roads that cut through the woods, but we got a lot of woods. And so they went off, looked for the kid, and mostly cut through these woods. And 90 minutes, they found the kid. Because the kid has a history of wandering off, and especially into the woods. So they had some idea, but about 20 people, 90 minutes, found him like in one of these woods, past some supermarket behind there at some place, like literally he wasn't like a small kid, but he was lying there, whatever. And then they're asking, how do I get back? Can anybody pick me up? I went all the way to the woods. I'm in the next neighborhood over, whatever it was, and it was over. And that was incredible, and yet it was like extraordinary, and yet so ordinary, because that happens over and over and over again, that people they feel a sense of responsibility for each other, that they don't hesitate to jump in. And a lot of these people probably don't even know each other. I mean, this happens if somebody asks me, they need help, I'm saying, okay, here you go. I'll do what I can. And I mean, I may not even know who the person was actually, but you're so used to it, it becomes the norm.
I want to leave your neighbor now.
Well, you're welcome to come and visit. Yeah. It's just I wish it was down the road, but not so simple.
It's okay. Or maybe we can, now we have all, I think, the tools to build the same in our neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah, now we know. And just something, I think something that, I don't know, there's a nagging voice inside my brain. Like, I know, like, personally, that community makes everything much better. It helps with resilience. It helps with safety and security, as you said, with the feeling of loneliness, with taking action, with sustainability, all of that things. But I think there is from the education that we got, both maybe from media and what we heard around, there's a nagging voice inside my brain that is that if you try to create a neighborhood like this around yourself, then you will lose your sense of autonomy. And then people
No way,
would
no
be...
way, no way, no way, no way. I would say a couple of things. People, I think there was a time, and it might be true in some societies more than others, in which community was suffocating. It might have been not good for some minorities, might not be good for women, for example, might not be good for people who are a little bit unusual in the way they thought. And so I do think there is the risk. If you think about like a continuum from super individualistic to super communitarian, there is a danger. If you got so super communitarian, you would be correct. But I think my argument is we are so afraid of that. We've gone far too much to the other side, and we don't have to go all the way back here. And I'm not sure we were always there, but we probably were sometimes there. We need to go to the middle where there's a balance. And we've actually lost the balance in our societies today. And I think if you're in a neighborhood my neighborhood is warm, it's, again, everyone has their own house or their own apartment. There's lots of choices for what you do. So if you're not quite with that group, and that group might be a little more communitarian, you go over here, they're less communitarian. There's a healthy mix. Again, we're talking thousands of people and maybe 20 or so institutions. And people, again, when there's so much choice at such a small scale, you're getting the mix of both worlds. And so I would say, on the other hand, I feel that this is empowering, because you feel like every day you have a security blanket around you. That means lots of little problems become unproblems or non-problems, whatever the right word is. So we're always solving things that would be hard to solve. And when you're interdependent, you actually are gaining a strength that if you were completely autonomous, again, we're independent and interdependent. Autonomous is like you're isolated and you're alone. And that's very different. And again, you want the healthy mix. If you don't have the interdependence, you don't have the security blanket, you're going to have problems. I mean, people might have problems paying rent, practical. People might have problems. I mean, we have charities that are taking used goods and giving it to other people, and all things that you might have problems buying things. I mean, there's a lot of you might have problems that somebody needs to watch your kids. You might have problems. I mean, there's lots of little things that people help each other with that they would not be able to solve otherwise. For me, it's a sense of freedom, actually, freedom from being embedded versus the freedom of being alone. And I think the freedom from alone is an illusion. And we fool ourselves with that illusion every day. I think very commonly in these wealthy countries.
Yep. There are so many songs on freedom.
So many songs of freedom.
Yeah.
When was the last time you heard a good song about community? Please send it to me.
Yeah, we should probably look for it, all right. It doesn't exist.
I'm looking to hear your voices on that song.
Let's do it with Kaplan. You will.
Okay, I'm waiting for it. It's not easy. You got to write the music and everything. It's challenging.
Yes. Thankfully, it's not us going to write.
Yes.
We know people that know music.
Exactly. I think a lot of the problems that we are facing right now, like social sustainability, environmental sustainability, conflict, all of this, we are a little bit made to believe, or we kind of believe it only as technical issues that people who are an expert in it can have opinions about them, can solve them, and all those things. So I think because of this type of belief, when we are talking also about solving the global issues, the generalists are always pushed away because it seems that they are a little bit all over the place. And being a generalist, I feel that a little bit, and I think that a lot of our listeners are that, because we talk about everything here, not a very, very specific architecture-focused podcast. So if you could tell us in solving this type of board issues, what could be the role of generalists, and what are the things that they could help with, and why are they needed in a board that experts are, on one specific topic, are put above all else when we are talking about global issues?
Yeah. So again, there's multiple things you could talk about. At first, we need thriving places. We don't need thriving housing, thriving healthcare, thriving education. And each of those, if you're thinking about neighborhoods, those silos only work as well as the neighborhood does. And if no one is owning the neighborhood, basically having a commitment to the success of the neighborhood, each of those silos they measure success by units. So more units, or more inputs, and they cannot get good results if you don't have the neighborhood thriving. And I think lots of our social problems, we don't connect them. We could talk about polarization, mistrust. I'm using the U.S. We have rising suicides. We have rising depression, mental illness. I mean, I can't speak for every country, but we have a lot of negative trends in the society. And to think that you can solve that by having more of the silos, that it's a service problem, I think is actually completely illogical. You have to have something that solves the horizontal, not only the vertical. And I like to think horizontal versus vertical. And so that would be one thing I would say about it. I think we have to think about that people and places and societies and countries, there's a holistic element, an element of, if you're just thinking climate, just for example, climate, there's a thing about negotiations. And so the negotiation is not going to be technical, the negotiation is going to be political. But if I also think about the health of a society or a community, we need to find ways to integrate. We need to find ways to bring people together. There's a relational element. I mean, again, if you're talking generalist versus specialist, again, you could go in many directions. But in terms of the health of our societies, it's a very horizontal, holistic, integrative, relational. It's not a specialty. There actually needs to be a specialty that's horizontal. And so I mean, there is bits of it here and there, but it seems to cut across all the specialties. And many of the problems we face is not from a lack of knowledge. It's from a lack of, whether it's social or political strategy to address what we might call as underlying social, cultural, political challenges. And those don't fit in the standard silos or the specialties. For me, it's a different kind of specialty that is undervalued and for me is so important. And I would encourage you and anyone listening to embrace the ownership of places, or the ownership of something that's more relational or society. And don't be fooled that those silos and the specialties, I think it's an easier life in some ways because you're just following the silos, but it's, I don't think it's answering some of our needs, but we need both. Again, it's about both. I think another way to think about it is that a healthy society has lots of relational associations and has lots of large-scale efficient systems. And right now there's a large tilt towards the efficient systems and a great undervaluing of the relational associational. And we need both. And right now we're only doing one. And therefore we're getting less and less healthy as a society.
Yeah. Unbalanced.
Hopefully that's a good answer for you. Again, I wish I could flip a switch and people would see that, but there's good reasons. There's a good reasons because that's where all the money is in the silos.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's much harder. It's much harder to think about it this way. But I think it's really the thing that's actually wrecking our societies is everything being professional silos and nothing that's horizontal, holistic, associational, relational.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess our last question is connected to this. So since we don't have a switch that we could just do this.
I do see a switch on your wall back there. Isn't there a switch on that wall back there?
Is there?
I mean,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
We can edit a switch, actually.
Okay.
Where she's connecting them.
Is she going to get a switch?
Yes,
that's the switch to flip everything. There you go.
Hopefully. Have you find it?
Yes, it's there.
So, as I was saying, since we don't have a switch, but we would like to have a switch, our final question would be if you could change like one thing or maybe more thing on a policy level, to make all these changes that we were talking about, what would that change be?
I think that's almost the right question, but not quite the right question.
Quite.
I think the
make the right question and give us an answer.
The question is not a policy question. It's the question of the structure of our systems. So if I had to make one change, I would change government from being siloed to being neighborhood-centric. And that, to me, is the big change. I think that works at a small town level, but most of us don't live in small towns. And that's not an answer for everything. But, for example, I think you could have, let's be practical. The city of Atlanta has a very ambitious mayor who's very neighborhood-centric, and he is trying to literally create metrics. I'm actually going to Atlanta in about 10 days, and I will be meeting those people because I really want to learn firsthand what they're doing. And they're creating metrics, and they're trying to restructure government so that the silos measure success and are forced to work cross purposes neighborhood level. And if they get past that, their next goal is actually to create some mechanism to bring the nonprofits together, because the nonprofits have the same problem. You're doing food, you're doing health, you're doing this, you're doing that, and there's no holistic cross to, again, the horizontal. So they're also thinking that what mechanism can they create? So neighborhood quarterbacks is one mechanism. I think it's not the only one, but neighborhood metrics, neighborhood quarterbacks, neighborhood anchors, whatever you got to change the incentives in the system. And I've seen other cities, like Seattle once had a very, very large neighborhood office with maybe 100 people, and they gave neighborhoods the chance to plan. They gave neighborhoods the chance to decide how money would be spent. They created neighborhood gardens. They even brought like what they call like neighborhood city halls. They created, I think it was 13 offices of government where you could get all your needs done in your neighborhood. So the whole point of all these things is to change the whole dynamic that made instead of having these institutions up here, let's bring them down here. And it's not a policy, it's actually let's think neighborhood centric about everything we do. And if you're a philanthropist, are you measuring success by your neighborhoods? If you're a nonprofit, are you measuring success by nonprofits? And here's a case where some governments are trying to think about how do we measure success by neighborhoods. That is what I would suggest. It's a structure more than just a specific policy.
Love it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I want to start this.
Let's elect you mayor, and then you can do that.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start from that.
Yeah, let's start from talking to 8 neighbors.
Send me your campaign poster. But I like to hear how your You'll tell me who your 8 neighbors are next time we talk.
Okay,
I think
exactly.
I'm speaking to you on Monday or Tuesday, so you only have a few days.
You have time. I mean, you have time. Let's start now.
We'll try. And the campaign name would be Here's the Switch.
Oh, here's the switch.
I already branded it. Okay. Thank you so much, Seth. This was okay. Yeah.
So insightful.
Yes. Oh my God. Let's have you a lot of more times in the podcast.
You're
really
very
helpful.
kind. You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. It takes a lot of effort to do a podcast, and you must be very passionate about what you're doing. So I appreciate your passion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this much time also. Yeah.
Super last question. Is there something you want to promote?
I would just say find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to follow me. I do have a website, SethKaplan.org. I would love if people would read my latest book, Fragile Neighborhoods. Came out almost a year ago. I think there's going to be a soft cover copy coming out in a few weeks. I don't know the exact date, but buy one or the other. But by all means, find me on LinkedIn, Seth Kaplan, and connect with me, follow me. If anyone who's listening or watching has questions, I'm more than happy to jump on a quick call. I get these all the time from people in Europe, in the United States, in Australia, and elsewhere. And I'm more than happy to be helpful. If I can be helpful, it's very gratifying to be useful in some way. So by all means, find me. And thank you both for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of your day.
Yeah.
Have a good rest
Bye.
of your day. Tell me about your neighbors. Take care. Be well.
Yeah, we'll do.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye.